Stanford University.
It is great to see all of the faces and people that I can see. Thank you, Tia, Tia noticed that I was here before and welcomed me, so thank you. And it's very good to see everyone. Good to see you, Lama Rod. Got to hear you just as in the last session, and of course, always my dear Dr. Jasmine. I'm really happy to be here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams. And I'm really happy to have been able to share and give a little bit of a talk. Gosh, was that last week, or was that just the day before yesterday? The day before yesterday, which feels like last week, because we are in a real like time warp. How many people really feel the sort of like sense of like time just sort of collapsing on itself, and just being really odd, both moving very fast and also very slow at times. I very early on in the pandemic, I was noting this, and I was like, wow, there's really, and some more brilliant person than I said, like, oh, that's called time dilation. And I was like, oh, and I've since looked it up and realized that there's a good phrase for the sense of how time is moving with time dilation. So I'm happy for all of you to be here and be sharing in really like has to be like my favorite thing in the world is the Radical Dharma Framework for Liberation. And of course, not only because I've been a part of constructing it, but because I've had the opportunity to see so many people touch it. And, it's quite rare really that you get to be able to be a part of bringing into fruition something that is actually in its whole as a framework that really actually moves people. I've seen it move, everything from like the way people structure their conferences to the way they're structuring organizations, and see it kind of unfold over and over again. And today I get to talk about one of the really central pieces. I mean, everything is really important, like how we go in and kind of like how we go on. And liberatory path is like how we roll. Like it's like this is, contemplative approach talks about like how do we arrive here? What is the way that we literally approach the unshaping and unfolding of our lives? And embodied practice is it is actually like what it is we need to do, like how it is that we bring ourselves there, how we need to engage. And liberatory path is kind of like the what it is. Like this is the what it is, right? It's like what it's all about. And then you go on to prophetic praxis, and prophetic praxis starts to take you to like, and then how do you bring that back? And so it's like kind of on the way out, and collective process. But this is the pinnacle. It's sort of the top of the mountain, if you will, if you kind of looked at it like this, on the way in and right at the top, and then working your way up to bringing it out into the world. Like this liberatory path is the road that we make by walking, right? It is the road that we are going to make by walking. And we're going to make that road by walking together, which get to that with collective process. When we're doing Radical Dharma camps, we do this like fantastic exercise. And I know, I was chatting with Dr. Sai in the background. We often call her Dr. Sai. I was chatting with Dr. Sai kind of in the break as Lama Rod was sharing. And, I was like wrapping my head around it. And this whole thing is like, we're all wrapping our head around to be on yet another Zoom call and figuring out how to do that in a way that isn't, continuously taxing. And it is taxing. And those of you that feel taxed, I have to just, let you know, we were just saying this, it's like, there's nothing wrong with you. We're doing so much more. I used to give a talk, and that meant I would like prepare myself, and I would pack, and then I would call a Uber or, or Lyft, and I would so I'd be in a car by myself for a little while or chatting to the driver. And then I would like get out in the airport, and I would have, dynamics with the people and the security. And then I would go through the airport, and I would stop at the mall and, and like get a coffee or something and muddle around. And then I would sit and wait for the plane, and they would call. Well, I don't usually wait for the plane because I'm always like, so at the end of the time, I'm kind of like walking right on the plane. But anyway, you get my point, right? There was all this thing that was my on the way to work, that was like interaction with people and moving around and being able to be in my own head, in my own body, and in my own, thoughts. And now it's like, oh, I'm getting ready to go and do a talk. And so I'm preparing, and I'm on a screen, and then it's on a screen. And so, if you're feeling like taxed and, kind of like drained, we're doing way more processing. And we're doing more processing at this sort of like bizarre structure and format that's essentially like the idea of like human beings being about 2 feet away from you, and 49 60 human beings being 2 feet away from you is not not how we are. We are not programmed to manage like 60 people being 2 feet away from us, right, for hours on end. So give yourself a break and have some like sense of like ease, and let yourself not feel like your eyeballs have to, be glued here, because that shows that you're paying attention. So the liberatory path is actually going to start with liberating you from a sense of being here in a way that doesn't allow you to be in ease. And so I really want to invite you to have that sense of ease. I see somebody curling up now on a couch and getting some like ease time. That's really important. And Dr. Sai was talking about that process of like figuring out when it is that we need to like step back and ease off. And there's something in here that feels both like there's this pandemic that's kind of holding us back from doing sort of part of our lives. And so we sort of have to make up for it, by doing more here. And then we're, projecting ourselves into the future of going back to normal. So we want it normal, but it's not normal. There's a lot of tension and pulling on our systems and on our bodies that in this process in Radical Dharma, one of the things that I found that is the most supportive about it is that we're naming things, right? That there's a power in naming just what is here and what is unfolding, so that we can be more honest with ourselves. As Lama Rod was saying, it's like we have so much challenge with having these conversations because we react. But part of the reason that we react is because we're not in like dialogue with ourselves, right? We say get in the conversation, Radical Dharma, but it's really about getting into the conversation with yourself first and foremost, right? To actually be honest and to develop your capacity to tolerate the truth of your own reality, right? So developing your capacity, your ability to manage and to integrate um, the 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 truth, right? To develop that capacity so that you can tolerate the truth, because truths, especially truths that alter our reality, right, they're actually, and if they're new for us, it's painful, right? And I've talked about that in lots of different practices and approaches to things, that when new information, confusion comes at it, it's literally cutting new grooves in our brains. So there's actually pain involved, right? It's nervous system pain, right? It's not like somebody's hitting you pain, but and any of us that have had like autoimmune disease illnesses or any kind of nervous system know that like nervous system pain is really intense, because it's not locatable, right? It's like, it's just this sense of like pain and the weightiness of it and the burden of it and the fatigue of it. So by naming what's up for us and what's present for us, there's already a kind of literally lightening of the burden, as Dr. Sai was talking about, in the form of sharing it with other people, which doesn't solve the things, but it has this capacity to help have us like self-reflect on like, oh, there are variations of of the same theme of my suffering that is being held by other people. And so they can hold that with me. We can't solve each other's problems, right? So much of our productivity centric culture suggests that the reason that everything is about the acquisition of something, right? We're acquisitive, right? And so we don't share unless we're going to get something out of the share. That's what happens. We think sharing has to do with, I'm going to get something out of it. And if I'm not going to get something out of it, then I shouldn't share, right? Because we're already like calculating. That's our capitalist, like hyper capitalism, that everything is about like spending something and getting something back from it. And so it warps our mind when it comes to the realm that capitalism is not meant to have, it doesn't have any dominion over, which is our spiritual lives, right? We don't spend our breath, right, to get something back from it. Like life just is. Breath is until it isn't. So we're not like spending breath, like we have this like great grace of breath happening all by itself, that we in breath and we out breath with, inshallah, we're not needing a machine or anything else because of incapacitating illnesses. But for the most part, in our general lives and even in our difficult lives, that breath comes in and breath goes out by itself. So there's no spending, right? There's no taking and trying to like get something as a result of like the breath that you have. So we have to kind of shift away from those hyper capitalist or cancerous or toxic capitalist mindset that is always doing like a little bit of calculation, right? You're always doing, it's like a little bit of calculation, mine, right? Figuring out like what's yours, what are you going to get out of this? And it steals away from us a fundamental sense of humanity, of being in relationship with our collective suffering, and therefore keeping us out of relationship with our collective joy. Because what we're doing is we're counting, and we're trying to figure out like what is mine and what is yours, and like what we get out of. Well, it's not gonna, if I share my issue, my pain, my dilemma, my challenges, my foibles, my flaws, right? If I share those flaws, I'm not going to get anything out of it. Or even worse, which is what our structure has set up, I'm going to get disbelonged. I'm going to get disbelonged, right? And particularly structures of white supremacy and how that has been deeply immersed within our culture. There's always this suggestion that if you break rank, right, if you break away from the pack, that you will be put out. So therefore, what is essential in this path, in this liberatory path, is to figure out what is our own truth. And this really brings us back to the core name of Radical Dharma, like what is our truth? And how is it that we forge a path that allows us to be liberated from toxicity, from cancerous ideas, from all the kinds of ideas and ways of being and showing up in the world that keep us from living in wholeness with ourselves, that have us degrade the truth of our humanity for the sake of acquisition of material gain, wealth, position, power, etc., etc. Liberatory path is about how we begin to reconcile and, well, discover like what is our path forward, that is the path that leads us into generativity and wholeness, right? And that wholeness will always mean it's in relationship and dynamic relationship with the wholeness of other people. But if we've been taught that we're in the scarcity mentality, that the only, if somebody else has something, that means there's less for me, right? Then we're pitted against each other, and we can't see any way forward in terms of having a path of thriving that doesn't necessitate someone else's devaluing and necessitate someone else having to be on the bottom. And we say this, perhaps the worst and the most insidious phrase that exists: that's just the way it is. And it's not just the way it is, it's the way we make it, and it's the way that it has been designed, but it isn't just the way it is. It is the way that we allow ourselves to abdicate responsibility for our own relationship and our own commitment to our liberation, so that we let that just happen, right? And we become complicit simply by taking our hands off the wheel of our own responsibility for our lives. So I know that one of the questions that came up out of the talk that I shared the other day, and the practices that you've had today, is like, how do we figure out that liberatory path? How do we navigate and set our feet firmly on that liberatory path that I spoke about, quite particularly at this time in history and our understanding and our shared reality? We have individual reality and we have micro realities, cultural realities, right? The culture of our families, right? The culture, the subculture of our different relationships with communities, with our queer communities, with our communities of Latinx people, with our communities of cis females, our communities of trans women, or our communities. So we have all these micro communities, but we have this collective shared reality, right? This relative reality that we had called that's shared between us, right? That brings us here together. We can call it like our national reality or our transnational reality, right? That this shared space of this society, right? That has these funny, fuzzy edges, but we know what I mean. And inside of this shared reality, one of the things that we often talk about is radical Dharma, is that our common language, in addition to insisting upon English, our common cultural language, though, in case whenever it is not specifically named and actively being renegotiated, our common shared cultural language is whiteness. That's how we operate, right? That it is demanded of us that we operate on under the paradigm set forth by Eurocentric ideals of like how time moves, what is valued, what is devalued, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. So when somebody says like, you shouldn't talk that loud, or you shouldn't be that big, or you shouldn't want that much, or you shouldn't have that position, who is the should and should not defined by, right? It's prescribed by white, so-called norms of white culture. And since there's no such thing as white people, there's actually no such thing as white people, really. What are norms of white culture, or so-called white culture? Since, I always tell people, like, there's Cece, I see Cece Casablanco, I see like all sorts of folks of color, and I'm no more the same as to them, people of color, as other white peoples here are from each other, right? Your Swedish heritage and British and Italian, and you couldn't put an Italian person and a British person together and tell them they're the same peoples. They would be like, what, right? So as different so-called white peoples in the Americas are as different from each other as people of color are different from each other. But somehow we're seen as different if we're Asian and Latina and Black and brown. Like we're seen as different, and somehow the white people are all like one big mosh. Of course, that's not different. So what is it that keeps them all together? Well, the culture, right? The culture, the shared, and culture is nothing but and this is Dr. Sai's favorite word, agreed upon set of protocols by which we operate, sometimes implicit and sometimes explicit, right? So there's explicit protocols and implicit. So that's what culture is. So what is that culture for? Well, every culture we have is organized around maintaining things. That's why we have culture. So we have culture, and it maintains certain things. And everything that's not inside of that, of maintaining what the culture is organized to maintain, is considered, right, countercultural, outside of the culture. So what does whiteness then maintain? It maintains white supremacy. So it's meant, whiteness, the culture of whiteness is meant to uphold white supremacy. So when we say we liberatory path, part of what we're getting liberated from, right, are cultures of whiteness, no matter what body color you're in. I'm talking about your body. I'm not saying get liberated from white people. I'm talking about liberated from cultures of whiteness. And that's especially true for white-bodied people, because you're the most susceptible. because you have the most inclined to imagine yourself as that whiteness and you are the same thing, and it's actually not true. Right? You and whiteness are not the same thing. So it's really important to hear, like, whiteness and white people are not the same thing. White people are the most susceptible to it, and they're the target of induction into whiteness, right? They're the primary target of induction into whiteness, but whiteness and white people are not the same thing. And being from New York, you know, it was weird to like get into parts of the country where like white people were the same. And I was like, wait a minute, but there's Polish people and they're Jews and, you know, and Italians. And like, and I grew up with all kinds of people that had white skin, but they weren't white people. They were Italians and they were Jews and they were whatever else they were. And I was like, but I'm like, they're not white, they're Irish. I'm like, that's not white, they're Irish. So I had like just that little edge of time, right? That where I watched them switch and then they became white. Because white meant wealth, white meant access, white meant privilege. But white also means a divorcing from the truth of the reality as it is in front of you. In order to make yourselves amenable to those comforts, in order to avail yourself of those comforts, you have to ignore the discomforts, the sufferings, the impact that acquisition, that wealth, that attainment requires, right? So you have to divorce yourself from a certain level of natural, organic, human relationship. You have to ignore what's in front of you. You have to ignore statistics. You have to actually start warping them around. You have to start pretending that the pandemic doesn't exist until the president gets it. Right? You have to start like literally not believing the reality that's in front of you, because it is irreconcilable to have the kind of wealth, access, privileges, etc., without also recognizing how that access creates, or it's not that the access creates inaccessibility or inequity for others, it's that the access is built on the inaccessibility and the disequity for others, the inequality of others. It's built on it. In other words, it can't exist, right? It's actually impossible. It's not like, oh, there's wealth and then some people got left out of the wealth. It's like, no. The wealth got built on making sure that it got taken away from those people's capacity to have that wealth. So that little weird story we have when we start calling things privilege, right? We sound like, oh, they're just mad because they didn't get it. That's what that sets up. That imaginary idea sets up like, oh, there is privilege and privilege is just somehow neutral. And some people didn't get a part of it. And now we have to figure out how we help some of those other people get some of what we've got, rather than what actually happened is we assured that certain people could not have access to things, and actually access to things was taken away from them, right? That rights were withheld from them so that privilege could accrue. Privilege is like a bank account, right? It's like a bank account that you just happen upon and there it is, right? So all of a sudden you've got like money to spend and you didn't even save anything in there, but somebody did, right? Somebody did throughout history. So liberatory path is about figuring out how it is we return ourselves to being able to be in direct relationship with the truth as it is. How it is that we tone our nervous systems and restructure the way that we see the world so that we are free of the kinds of concepts and ideas that we inherited that keep us from seeing the truth. And if we can't see the truth, if we can't acknowledge the truth, then we can't acknowledge the truth. If we can't acknowledge the truth, then we can't be responsible for the truth. If we can't be responsible for the truth, then we can't act on the truth. If we can't act on the truth, then we are complicit in suffering. We are complicit in degradation. We are complicit in a pattern and a history of domination over people for the purposes of the acquisition and maintenance of wealth. And power in the form of not natural organic power, but power in the form of domination, power over. So the liberatory path is not this like kumbaya place, like once I like, well, you know, I'm gonna like go and do the special thing and join the liberatory path. Liberatory path is the reclaiming of our fundamental humanity and going back and getting what's yours. I like to say, go get yourself. So it can sound aspirational, this liberatory path. It's like, well, I don't feel like taking the liberatory path today, you know, and there's some people that feel like that's what their thing is, so I'm not going to do that. So I want you to understand that first, the liberatory path is not some special rarefied place for the exceptional amongst us. That is not what the liberatory path is. It's a degraded society that imagines the liberatory path, right? It's an indication of the degradation of society and our fundamental spiritual values, that the proposition becomes that the liberatory path is one that is exceptional. Liberatory path is one that is about making whole our own selves on behalf of all of humanity. So we first get clear about what a liberatory path is and like remove it from which much of Buddhism and Western invoked Dharma has made it, and has made it into this like exceptional thing that the special people go. We get titles for it. And so we're special. So let's first like take that back, right? The sort of navigate the notion of an exceptional liberatory path, and that it makes you exceptional, and therefore it's only accessible to a limited exceptional few. Liberatory path is our right, and it is our responsibility for those of us that are committed to our humanity. So it's a human right. This is going back and getting yourself. This is going back and getting your wholeness. This is going back and tearing up the contract that was signed in bad faith, that made you complicit in a system and structures of degradation that denies the humanities of some people for the sole purpose of having a very few small number of people. Once you start chopping it away, not even talking about the 1%, because this is about the people in the 1% that are in female bodies, and they weren't intended to be there either. So a very small limited number of people, and it wasn't intended for Jews, and it wasn't intended for the Irish, and it wasn't intended, we can start cutting away and there'll be like this many people left there for them to maintain power and privilege over and at cost to everybody else under. But it is an amazing and genius design, because there's always this promise that some of you down there may get up here somewhere, and which leaves us amongst ourselves to fight our way with this scarcity mentality, that if we can just climb hard enough, climb over enough people, stand on enough backs, that we'll get to that rarefied air too. I think if you get there, you'll choke, folks. You'll never get there if if you haven't already been predetermined by the body that you come in. You'll never really get wherever that place is, and in that way, it's just as seductive, right, as the whole, all of the ideas that have us believe that there is a something out there outside of us that's going to make us whole and complete, right? So it is just as deeply soul troubling, right, spirit troubling, spiritually depleting as the idea that there is something out there, right? It's the bad emptiness, right? The emptiness that's not about like, empty of all phenomena, but rather like, I feel empty. I feel incomplete if I don't have the car, the house, the the $1,000, no, now the $10,000, now the $1 million, now the small country, now the ability to lord over X number of people. That's what the liberatory path is. The liberatory path is going back and getting yourself from false ideas that somehow there's something out there that's going to make you complete and whole and true. How do you do that? Within a culture that from every direction it's telling you that it's something else, somewhere else, that if you go get that, then you'll be complete and whole and true. First, you have to acknowledge that you're lost. So some days, excuse me, not days, I wish it were days ago. Some years ago, I started to take up and be in relationship with way more indigenous practices. And I did that because I understood, in the way that I talk about disrupting, right? Disrupting, colonizing notions, disrupting capitalization notions, disrupting notions of domination. I realized, like, oh, the way that even my Dharma practice, my Zen practice, my Buddhist practice has been communicated to me has been limited a lot to right about here. It kind of lives right from here going up. And indigenous practices, because of their historic and ancestral and from the beginning of time, right? Relationship with direct and contacting relationship with the natural world. When I say the natural world, I mean this included, this body as the natural world, right? And affirming the human body's rightful location in the natural order, right? Affirming the human body's natural location, a location in the natural order. So many of the practices are body-based, right? Embodied. So many of the practices put us in direct confrontation with the core break that puts human beings asunder. The notion of a separate self. The idea of a separate self. So indigenous practice, far from being some kind of like bizarre things that, people that we don't understand are doing exactly the things that, like, lots of high-minded people that talk about transformation today name, right? They are intended to re-intimate us, to make us intimate once again with the whole self through the relationship, our rightful relationship as part of the cosmic order and natural order of all of the universe. And one of my dear brothers in that is Cherokee by blood, but practices in Lakota ways. And his name is Albino Garcia. And I don't remember the whole story, but Albino was telling me this story about, like, amongst his people, that one of the practice that they would have is that when they got lost with themselves, right? When they got lost, they would be out and they would be doing a practice, and then they're like out in the woods and everything. And when out in the practice, if they got lost, what they would do to find their way back is they would turn their shirts inside out. So they would turn their shirts inside out. And then turning their shirts inside out was both symbolic, right, of like a real surrender and an invitation for wisdom, a surrender to the fact of one's lostness, and an invitation for wisdom to come to give them the right direction. So our practice is going to be for us to turn our shirts inside out. We are going to turn our shirts inside out and go into our own spaces where you are. Take advantage of the space you have. Get your eyeballs off this screen and take a little walk with the prompt that I'm going to give you to invite an inquiry into what the obstacles are that keep you from being true to yourself. What the obstacles are that hinder you from being true to yourself. So that's one initial prompt. And the second prompt is, how have you been participating in the ways of the system, I like to call that, right? How have you been participating in the ways of the system? So what are the obstacles that keep you from being true to yourself? And because that's something that's out there, right? There's obstacles and I see them and let me see what might be there. But just in case you get sneaky and you make it all about everything that's out there, how am I, and don't go looking for things that you don't know, because we don't know what we don't know. How do you know that you are being complicit with the ways of the system? And by ways of the system, I mean the systems and structures that have you collude, in which you collude to maintain your own position, your own location at cost to others. Your own positions of access, your own positions of power at cost to others. It's not, this is not childish, right? Where it's just like, well, I didn't know. It is at cost to others. It's not just the stuff, it's not the penny that you found, right, on the floor somewhere, right? It's the one that you know that when you got that penny, it means somebody else lost something. And you don't have to be vague and abstract about it. I'm just go right into like, yeah, there are real places that I know that the way that I am participating in this system is at cost to other people. I can see it. I can articulate it. I'm not asking you what you're doing with it. I'm asking you to simply acknowledge you're lost. Right? To just acknowledge you're lost. So, everybody have those two questions? Does everybody have a place that they can wander around? Yeah? Wander in your, I can go back here in my office. I've got my Black Lives Matter shirt on. You can wander around in whatever space. We're going to take about, it's not going to be a big, long time. You're going to close your eyes. And so have a space that you're not just sort of going to, don't stumble over the kids' toys that are on the floor. Close your eyes, or keep your eyes downward if you need that to be safe or to be balanced, right? Safe physically by external things, or safe internally because your balance requires that, right? To cast your eyes downward, pull your energy inward, and just take a walk. The reason I want you to take a walk is because I don't want you to think about it. I want you to turn your shirt inside out, and I want you to just allow it to come. So when you come back on screen, your shirt should be inside out. And you should allow yourself to center into the invitation of the wisdom that already exists, not go looking for something, right? Not get heady about it, but just the wisdom of that already exists. You don't need don't walk around with a pen or a pad. That is not what we're doing here. We're just letting what comes to us come. And then whatever we're going to share back or hold, we're going to trust that wisdom is in us. We don't need like pen and pad. We don't have to like write like colors around it. We just are going to let it come and see what happens with what stays with us, what surfaces. So you're just going to come back with two things, and you're going to come back with the responses to those two things. You're not going to come back with a whole bunch of a list, because if you come back with a whole list, you're going to be overwhelmed. You're just going to see what comes out of the information you receive. So you're not going to come and tell us, this is how I'm complicit. You're going to tell us what comes out of your awareness of what is coming to you, what you're receiving. Right? So that's the wisdom processing and integrating itself. And what you'll come back with is just what it is that is yours to do.
Welcome back. I had to resist my urge to want to join one of your small groups and hear the report backs. So hopefully you will feel a little less shy to unmute yourself and just share out a little bit. It'd be great to hear folks' experiences, what you heard from other folks that felt generative for you or resonant with you. Amen. Thank you for that offering and reflection. It resonates so much. Reverend Angel, we were talking earlier today about interrogating our proximities to power and really broke that down to be thinking about power as the ability to be resourced in our lives, right? And so much of what capitalism does, and this is exactly what Dachin is pointing out, is make us over prioritize kind of it like takes over everything, the priority to get the resources that we need to survive, almost as if that kind of like um priority will take care of everything else, right? That the kind of working hard and succeeding in the ways that work says that we can succeed will take care of the fact that I don't get paid attention to enough, or I don't get to talk to people enough, right? It seems to kind of overshadow all of the other needs that we have as human beings, as social beings, as earthlings. And then that proximity to caretaking, right? Having that responsibility to make sure that other people's survival is ensured is an incredibly important priority. And when it comes at the sacrifice of our ability to pay attention to ourselves and take care of ourselves at the same time, we notice that imbalance in all kinds of ways. That imbalance shows up in our bodies, that imbalance shows up in our relationships, right? And so being able to pull some awareness to those imbalances, those places of falling out of alignment with what we know we want for our liberation is the beginning of beginning to be able to come back. You can't fix what you can't see, as Reverend Angel says. So being able to see where you've fallen off the track is wonderful because it gives you an opportunity to return. Yeah. Other reflections we found, Karen said, we found that an obstacle was not having a group where we could share these concepts. And then Lou asked, some of us would like to join a radical Dharma practice group. Do you know of one, or shall we create one after this workshop? Any ideas or help? We got you. We got you, Lou. We got you, Karen. Rev, do you want to say a little bit about the spaces that you've created to create community for this kind of work online?
Yeah, we have created is sort of we created what was called the Radical Dharma Nation, and then the pandemic came along, and we built out something kind of larger around Radical Dharma Nation called the Liberated Life Network. And so the Liberated Life Network has within it a bunch of caucuses that are related to Radical Dharma, people that have actually come to Radical Dharma camps and conversations and so on. But even someone here, Xisi, who's here on the call with us now, has not been to an in real time Radical Dharma space, and yet we have a great number of people that have uh, committed themselves to really immersing in the Radical Dharma framework from various perspectives, not the least of which is a great radical race read, which uh, we're not actually fully complete, but we've completed the reading part, and over 1,000 people going through the Radical Dharma framework in a form of circling up with other people and being in caucus with other people. So there are a lot of people that are around, and we're also going to be doing a mapping soon. We were supposed to be doing a mapping, but we got pandemified, that maps people all over the place. But the idea is to, especially now with coronavirus, is to give people a place of support and connection around the Radical Dharma work and around practicing Radical Dharma ideas and theories and praxis of Radical Dharma through the caucuses that are on the Liberated Life Network and the internal. And I think Nikki here, yeah, Nikki Ford is here as well. And Nikki Ford is the coordinator of the Radical Dharma Nation that's inside here. So there is lots of juice. Obviously, all of us are, have been pulled in multiple directions, but we have managed to really formidably continue to move the Radical Dharma work forward, and you can come and practice with us.
And definitely, there's daily practice. There's all kinds of ways to become a part of the larger Radical Dharma family. And we invite you and welcome all of you recovering addicts of white supremacy, settler colonialism, heteropatriarchy, and all the things, because this is the work of healing backwards that we are taking up right now, and it is in tandem with getting out the vote. Melinda was noticing that those some of those obstacles, the tensions that are being surfaced, is wanting to be in practice with us today, but also wanting to support getting out the vote. And a lot of what we are, really preparing folks for is that whatever happens after the election, we are still prepared to work together. We are still prepared to flock. We have prepared ourselves. We have prepared the conversation so that we know who to bring in, we know how to bring it in, and how to build it up, because this is the time to not lose hope. This is the time to not lose momentum, but begin to build deeper reservoirs of strength for personal transformation that will seed collective liberation, right? And so it is our duty to fight for our freedom, as they say. It is our duty to win, and that work is only going to happen if we are able to show up for ourselves and show up for each other, and begin to share this medicine. So one of the things that we wanted to share with you is another practice in centering, and it's going to be our practice for to kind of apply the prophetic praxis of the, which is number 4 of the 5 in the Radical Dharma 5. And a lot of times people think about prophets telling the future, right? Being able to be soothsayers. But a lot of times what's happening is that they're actually telling the truth about the current moment. And folks just aren't ready to hear it yet, because we're so stuck in, so accommodating, acculturated to the way things were, right? And we all know this all too well with COVID and the realities that are newly setting in, but are hard to incorporate, integrate into our understanding of what the present moment is. So prophets really tell the truth about what is up right now. And it sounds like future telling, like soothsaying, seeing, to many people who aren't ready to hear it yet. And so this work of centering is really about telling the truth. I've been doing a lot of work in realizing how how much accommodating everybody else's priorities means that I have unlearned how to tell the truth about myself to myself, which makes it very hard to tell the truth to other people and to be accountable to what we are capable of and what we really have capacity for. Sometimes telling the truth is very, very hard because the people that we know need to hear it might not be ready for it, right? How do we wield that power of the truth that we stand in with love? There are so many ways to correct. We have entire departments of corrections set out about the business of correcting people's poor behavior and mistakes. But so much of that work is punitive. What I call it is part of the incarceration system. It is part of carceral thinking. And instead of helping us change, it actually creates separation, isolation, shame. These are not the things that help us change. Going back to your reflections on what has helped you change, how did you know you were changing, what supported you to change, right? Prophetic praxis is about creating the conditions for change that are not reproducing carceral logics of separation, punishment, and isolation, but are generative, as Reverend Angel was saying, cultivating spaces for generative connection, liberatory presence. Melinda is encouraging people to watch the documentary The 13th. I haven't seen it yet, but I talk about the 13th Amendment all the time and the ways that it carries the future of freedom, carries the past of slavery into the future of freedom through that exception clause, right? The end of slavery except as punishment for crime means that slavery wasn't ended. It was projected into the future of the freedom that we now enjoy, say we enjoy. And so, what we have to do in order to finish the unfinished work of abolition is to notice when we are correcting each other, policing each other in ways that carry on that punitive carceral logic, rather than creating a generative space for healing, repair, and collectivity. So, how do we tell the truth in a way that is full of love and compassion? Right? It's a corrective move, but it's not a punitive one. And so Reverend Angel is going to lead us in a centering practice to help us tell the truth with our whole hearts in a way that generates the fertile ground for us to be able to do so, wield that power of the truth with love.